So we already did the obligatory who's running Kubernetes, who's running Docker, who's got containers in production and in test and in dev, and who's been playing with it. What I want to know at the moment is who has not started this journey yet? A few? Okay, so most everybody's been at least playing with it. Okay, that's good to know. So I'm Sarah Novotny, and I run the Kubernetes community for Google. And I am delighted to be able to host this panel talking about web scale container utilization, but more specifically about the path that people take to learn about and grow and make choices about, because we've talked a little bit this morning. Alex said we want to level this up to business, but what choices have these companies made, have these people made about moving to containers? And we've got really great fun because everyone's at a different level here or a different path here, or a different point on the path. So I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves, telling us what the current container strategy is, what they're using in the full cloud native ecosystem around it. Is it in production? Where are they along this this investigation and evolution? So Matt, why don't we start with you, because you have something in your mouth.
Right. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
My name is Mats. I work as a product owner at Spotify in the infrastructure department. We started investigating lightweight containerization back in, 2 years ago, roughly. And at the time, there was no Docker. Well, Docker possibly existed, but it wasn't a big thing. It wasn't on Hacker News. It wasn't hyped. So we were looking at LXC and similar tools. Docker grew immensely. We couldn't believe all the hype we saw around Docker. And it also turned out to be a reasonably good project for our purposes. So we were looking at containerizing backend services and running them in production, ideally. Also using the same service artifacts for integration testing and similar things, enabling people to run those backend services on their workstations, in production, in a public cloud, potentially. So we ended up building our own orchestration framework called Helios. We built it completely in-house. We turned that into an open source project, and I think it was the day after or 2 days after, Google told the world about this new thing called Kubernetes and kind of stole our thunder. But they stole our thunder in a good way, because it's been really awesome to see like the ecosystem growing and people doing similar thing.
And are you still supporting and putting out Helios patches with the community and building that?
Yes, we are. We're actively developing it. Not sure for how long we're going to do that, now that there are so many compelling options out there.
Right.
We are.
Okay, excellent. How about you, Richard?
Oh, hi. So I'm Richard Kaufmann with Samsung SDS America, and I'm part of a research group that's working on infrastructure software, and our job is to figure out what Samsung should be running a couple of years from now. And last year we decided that that was going to be Kubernetes. That was just before the launch. And over the past year, we've been working on Kubernetes and its adjacency, meaning storage and networking and resilience testing and a bunch of other things. We have a group in Seattle led by Bob Weiss, who's over there in the only green jacket in the room. And he's one of the leaders of Kate Scale, which is looking at scaling up Kubernetes. So we've demonstrated a 1,000-node Kubernetes cluster, which was kind of cool.
There's a fun YouTube video about it.
Yes. Great production values, too. But we have been working, it's very novel for Samsung to be so deeply enmeshed in the open source community for infrastructure software. So that's been an interesting part of what we've been doing. And we've demonstrated really the benefits of the approach. And this coming year, our goal is to get it into production. So our plan is to use it for some of the services that we stand up. And SDS is one of the members of the Samsung group. And we provide services, mostly internal, but also external, about 20,000 people. And we provide the IT behind a lot of web scale services for consumers, a lot of B2B stuff, and a very, very large logistics operation. So that's us.
So we have containers in production, containers in pre-production. We lined everybody up perfectly.
R&D and heading for production.
Okay. And you, Leah, get to tell us, because I know you're much earlier in this path, so why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Leah. I work at Stripe in developer tools for internal developers. And we're sort of at the very beginning of looking into whether we want to use Mesos or Kubernetes, whether we want to use Docker or Rocket, and like there's all these options. And currently we're at the stage of like finding companies that are using them in production that are like a bit bigger than us, so we can talk to them and figure out what does and doesn't work. And in the coming like quarter, we're going to be deciding what makes sense for Stripe, trying to keep an eye on the fact that we're growing very quickly being a startup, so we need something that works both now and when we're like an order of magnitude bigger.
The classic 10x scaling problem. Always. Okay, so we've got you guys spread out across the spectrum of where you are in this investigation. So my next big question is, why did you start investigating containers? So let's start early on in the process. So like, what led you, Leah, to start investigating containers at this point, or led Stripe to?
So currently our like deploy process and dependencies and all that is like, especially deploy stuff, is relatively in-house. So there's like tools that we wrote when we were an order of magnitude or two smaller that we're outgrowing. And so we're looking into improving our deploy process and like reliability and stability and all of that. And also automating more things. Our like process around deploys and spinning up and down Amazon instances is relatively manual, and that a human has to be in the loop. So we've like decided we definitely want some kind of auto scaling. And so now the discussion is, do we just want to do Amazon auto scaling, which is a relatively small step from where we are now? Do we want to do Docker containers? Do we want to use Mesos or Kubernetes? Mesos doesn't require Docker containers. You can use C groups. Kubernetes requires Docker containers. We use Docker a little bit with Jenkins, and that's caused some stability and performance issues, which are hard to debug. And so then it becomes, well, do we want to use Kubernetes because it's great, but do we want to use Docker, which it requires, which isn't so great?
Or that you need more expertise around as well as a possibility.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump. Mats, you started early in this whole process, and so you're much further along. What drove you, because clearly Leah is about optimizing process and flow and scaling. What drove you at Spotify to actually investigate containers way back when?
A lot of the same thing. Like, containers themselves aren't that interesting to us, not the actual containers. The interesting thing is being able to automate things, being able to treat services as these abstract objects that we don't really need to care about. I don't need to understand that this particular service is written in C++ or Python. It's just a container to me. So as an infrastructure engineer, I can automate things much more easily. And the purpose of that is to reduce the burden of operations. We have operational responsibility in our feature team. So if you're an application developer and you build a backend service, then you are in charge of that service being up and alive. And that is a great way to scale an organization, as opposed to having like a dedicated operations team. But it also comes with a real cost, because all of a sudden we have application developers focusing on ops. We don't necessarily want that. So containers help us automate things to reduce the burden of operational responsibility.
So you saw it as the next evolution of infrastructure as code?
Sure.
Okay. All right, how about you? You have a whole different organization. These guys are both on the startup side, so you have a behemoth to turn.
We're not a startup, So first comment to you is we actually are deep in making Rocket work with Kubernetes. So we've been getting excellent support from CoreOS, and so the Kate Scale group and another SIG within the Kubernetes community are working hard to make that a reality.
Okay.
So that's good.
Which means I can promote the SIGs for Kubernetes. There's all sorts of ways you can contribute back to Kubernetes. So.
By the way, anybody else who has to get up on this stage, wear sunglasses. But why containers at Samsung? So at the highest level, I'd say, the charge is 0 defect, 0 touch. So we don't want fat finger operators to mess things up. We hate outages, especially at a company like Samsung. Failure is really not an option. You wind up hitting the carpet and apologizing. It's a big deal. So 0 defect is really important. The other thing is efficiency. So especially as a recovering high-performance computing person, I hate giving anybody a VMware tax or a virtualization tax. So containers promise the isolation of virtual machines without the cost, and it delivers on that. The other thing is we need to have flexibility so that workloads can snap up and snap down very, very quickly. So anybody who knows how long it takes to start a virtual machine, the idea of a container starting in a few milliseconds is very good. Even though milliseconds is a goal, we're trying to talk virtual machines down into a few minutes from like an hour, so a huge goal. So those are the reasons. It's basically zero defect, zero touch, efficiency, and handling flash mobs and rapidly changing workload requirements.
So here's the money question. If that was your goal with this, are you actually seeing the proofs of concept and the changes that you would expect or that you expected when you started looking for this?
So we certainly see the performance benefits, and I'm a financial modeling geek, and I see the benefits coming to us. And in order for me to talk somebody to putting this stuff into production, it's got to deliver. The other angle is it's where the herd is going. And if our job is to help our customers get their services hosted, and we can't be dinosaurs. So all of the open source communities and the for revenue software packages are now being built for this universe. And if you don't have the ability to host it, both on your own infrastructure and in public clouds, you're dead. So you have to do it.
So you're saying in many ways it has performed. You have gotten what you expected out of it. How about you, Matt? I'm going to let you off the hook, Leah, since you don't have it in production yet.
Yes and no. I think we're...
What's different?
Well, adopting Docker before Docker 1.0 was rough, very rough.
Before 1.0 is usually rough.
Yeah, we actually started running in production at 9 and 11, like 0911 or something like that, and that worked well enough. But we had to. It was very beneficial to have our own orchestration framework because we could work in some, put in some workarounds around some of the kinks and issues that we saw with Docker at that time. But it's gotten a lot better, and we have teams doing integration testing of multiple services at the same time in conjunction, all sorts of cool stuff happening. I think. So we're at roughly maybe a fourth of all services production, something like that, are now on the Docker platform or our Helios platform using Docker. I would guess that when we get to 50% or maybe 60%, we're going to see the real benefit coming in.
The real benefits,
that's when all teams pretty much use the same platform.
Yeah. So benefit through scale even internally.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I expect.
Okay.
One comment
Please.
is blah, 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 Docker, blah, 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 blah. I think we need to make sure that we all avoid single vendor lock-in.
Yes.
And so we need to start thinking about, the Open Container Initiative, and then we want that to be a standard layer that we can have multiple suppliers and all that good stuff. Yep. So think about other words besides just Docker.
Well, and you teed that up delightfully for me, because one of the questions that your comment about community and where people are going led to was how much do standards and communities and where we see the cloud native infrastructure going play into your discussion. So Leah, you're early on. Is that something that you're thinking about?
Definitely. So Mesos has like a bigger community around it, as does Docker, like a bigger existing community. And there's like multiple like consultants you could bring on to help you out with setting it up. Whereas Kubernetes has like these really big companies like Samsung and Red Hat and Google behind it. And it's moving very quickly. But like most of my research so far has been like reading documentation and like interviewing people who actually use it. And the people I found to interview for Kubernetes, like they're either like they're a smaller startup than us, like an order of magnitude or a few smaller, or they're like one team in a larger company and they aren't in production yet. Right. And so I had a lot of trouble, like really as like we want to find somebody who's using Kubernetes in production and is like at least a size larger than us. Like that's what you want when you want to try a low risk option. You want to find out what the problems are first. And so that's like the main thing that makes me uncomfortable with Kubernetes. Like it looks so promising and it's moving so fast, but at the same time, like the fact that it's only just getting to be sort of like 1,000 nodes is we need that. So like the fact that they only just got there means it's really hard to find somebody who's already been there. So it would be a risk to pick it, even though it looks better as like featureless and integration and all of that seems better than Mesos. It's still like, it's hard to find somebody who's already been there, whereas we already have people who've run Mesos clusters of that scale in-house.
Yeah, send me an email. We'll hook you up. It's all good. How about you, Matt? You wrote your own because there was no community at the time, and then you've moved from LXC to Docker. And the Docker community, it sounded like, might have been part of that. Is there more plan? Is the community or the standards, sort of standards coming from cloud native compute, something that is pushing you at this point to make strategic changes?
Maybe not right now, but we are increasingly aware of what's happening in the community. We're paying more and more attention to it. We had a close look at Kubernetes about 6 or 8 months ago, considered if it could possibly be an option for us. It turned out to be a little bit challenging at the time, mostly because we run all our stuff on bare metal, so dealing with the networking made us feel a little bit uncomfortable. Looked really promising. We didn't feel it was ready at the time, but it's probably time to have another look sometime soon. Same thing goes for pretty much every piece of technology we use, I guess.
Okay, how about you, Richard? You're deep in the community, I know that.
But why Kubernetes, why not other technologies? We did not want so there's grades of open source projects. We didn't want a single vendor dominant open source project. So one of the things that was very attractive to us about Kubernetes is that there were a couple of big guns in it. I guess we're now a little big gun, or I don't know. We try and help where we can. But the vibrancy of the Kubernetes community was one of the chief attractants. We knew a bunch of the people in it, had a lot of respect for them. They were very welcoming. And it's very spread out. If you attend the large Kubernetes Hangouts, there's a huge variety of companies that are there, all demonstrating technologies that work with it every week. So that's pretty neat.
Okay. So we've been talking about more specifically Docker and Kubernetes, but we've mentioned Rocket. There are lots and lots of things in this whole ecosystem. So what are other technologies maybe that you've researched, Leah, or that you guys are keeping an eye on, Matt, just that might be other things, sort of the dark horses that nobody's really playing with yet, or nobody has in production yet, but they're considering that we should all be watching?
I mean, the things we've been considering are basically, Mesos and Kubernetes are the big ones. The other ones that are sort of on the table are like Amazon auto-scaling groups, which are like, they do less, but they're easier to switch to if you're already on Amazon.
Yep.
And like Amazon Container Service, which is like apparently a lot like Mesos but hosted, versus Google Container Service, which is not a good fit for us since we're entirely on Amazon. But so we were also checking out like hosted container services versus like running our own in the cloud, in the public cloud.
Okay. How about you, Richard?
A couple of them.
Yay.
One that would have been a slam dunk until about an hour ago, which was, the Verizon talk was blah, 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 blah. IPv6 for everywhere, blah, 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 blah. So I actually think getting IPv6 as the internal plumbing for container-heavy systems, even if you have to bridge to IPv4 outside, killer idea. Yeah. So, and that might be the Skunkworks project this year. Yeah, I'm announcing to everybody. That might be fun to get that working.
It's not secret anymore.
Yeah. Second one is analytics inward focused into the data center, something that Google does quite a bit of. A sister research group of mine does analytics and machine learning. So playing around with some of those technologies, understanding how those work. The third one is applying that to security, but also just basic security hygiene. And one of the more interesting technologies I've seen in the last year for security is just in terms of basic keeping the plumbing in good shape is from Tanium, which does endpoint security, but lightweight agents that might make sense to bury inside of containers and make sure everything is copacetic inside of a container. Might be interesting. So those are three little stealth technologies that I think might deliver a lot of value.
Yeah. And specifically around containers, the addition of complexity and figuring ways to manage that complexity. How about you, Matt?
I don't think I can mention any particular product or
company or ideas,
but I'm really interested in handling secrets, configuration management, not config management in the necessarily traditional sense, but something that helps us help our engineers tweak those little knobs that they want to be able to tweak in real time, which tends to be harder with containers. So that and secrets management is probably what I'm most interested in right now.
So these are both things that you see as, well, actually both your list and Richard's list are things that you see that the cloud native ecosystem could be doing better or improving into and working and growing into.
I'd say so. I know a lot of this stuff was, or similar things were mentioned at the first presentation of the day. I was unfortunately not here because they wouldn't let me in with my coffee mug. But yeah, it sounded promising when I heard a
One second.
Innovation.
I like you rank coffee above PowerPoint. Good man.
I would have watched that talk if I could have brought my coffee in. Good to know. Okay. So since you, I'm gonna go in reverse. Since you, Mats, have had the most long-running production experience with this, what are specific resources that anyone who's looking at taking this to production really needs to think about or know about and pay attention to?
That is a fantastic question. It was 2 years ago. What is useful today? I don't think I can answer that.
Okay. Or even things that you know today that you didn't know 2 years ago that you might have wanted to.
I mean, a humongous difference today is that I can actually look up presentations and tutorials and go to conferences and stuff and I get a ton of information and meet people who do this in production. So like if there would be anything I would say today that people should have, and it's like network with people.
Participate in the community.
Yeah. Learn from others who made mistakes so you don't have to.
Yeah.
We couldn't do that really.
Yeah. And that, I imagine, was a challenge early on.
It was. We failed in all sorts of interesting ways. But that was also very educational. So.
Right, I was going to say, and so now we need to talk on all the ways that you guys failed and we shouldn't.
No.
No, okay.
It's embarrassing.
How about you, Richard? Any go-to resources that you think people should make sure that they take a look at today?
Yeah, my company lawyer is pretty close, so I'm not allowed to make endorsements.
No, you're not endorsing anything.
I will say that we've had a really good working relationship with CoreOS. Been very helpful. The second thing, which is a little commercial, is that we actually are in the business of providing consulting and help for people who wanted to get into the Kubernetes community. Okay. So we're starting to do that, most on a small scale, people who are more kind of partners or friend customers.
Okay.
So we're starting to do that, but sorry for that pitch. But as I said, we've had a really good working relationship with some of the companies in the space.
Yep. Okay. How about you, Leah? You've just started the research. So what are your go-tos right now to learn more?
I mean, the thing I really found helpful, like, of course, I read a bunch of stuff online, but the thing that was really helpful for sort of getting a better picture of where things are now is actually talking to people. Like, I talked to one of the guys at CoreOS, and I talked to one of the guys at Mesosphere, and then I got them to recommend, like, to help me find other companies that use these things in production. And, like, especially the guys at CoreOS especially were very open about, like, what things were in what state and which things you might not want to use yet or which things were going away. And that's a lot easier to find, like, from talking to a person who's, like, enmeshed in the community as opposed to, like, reading readmes that may or may not be out of date. Like, you know, not that Kubernetes is terrible about that, but, like, every project, when it gets big enough, there's just too much documentation to
Or when
update.
they're moving fast enough, yeah.
And, like, a person's really talking to people who are already using it, they can tell you, like, exactly where you should be spending your effort, like where it's good by default. Like the secret management in Kubernetes, people consistently really liked it, like their secrets config management. Whereas, you know, you have to be careful with, like, other parts of it. Like getting set up was, like, a common pitfall. Like there's, you know, they almost gave up twice was, like, a common story with, like, trying to get Kubernetes running. But they're like, once it's running, it's fine. Whereas Mesos, you know, it's very easy to set up, and then, you know, then you have to maintain Zookeeper alongside your, like, Mesos master cluster. So, like, they felt safer running Kubernetes once it was up, but Mesos was much easier to, like, get a test cluster running.
Get started, yeah. Interesting. So very different early experiences, it seems.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think one of them had better documentation than the other, but I can't remember at the moment which one it was. I think it was Mesos that had clearer documentation. That was, like, in one place, because, like, Mesosphere is very good about documentation.
Okay.
One second, isn't an out-of-date README a README?
Yeah, I think it should be, yes.
Sorry.
All right, any of you have last thoughts, or do we want to take maybe a question or two from the audience? We've got like 3 minutes.
Only if they have a good one.
So who has a good question from the audience? Aha, up front.
How much has the app container or, Rocket rolled into Docker, how much is that really proliferating, and how much have you seen changes in built around that standard?
That may be most in your court.
So we have seen extreme velocity coming from starting from a very low level. So, but with Rocket, it's kind of very hot off the press news that that's evolving rapidly, looking to use it within the Kubernetes community. So I expect if this talk were being held a couple months from now, we'd have results and we could show performance numbers and the benefits for it, both for scaling but also for long-living nodes. So I think that there are some benefits there. My stress isn't like, inside baseball, which company succeeds or anything like that. It's more from the community perspective, where for every piece of the ecosystem, I want multiple healthy suppliers. So, and I think a lot of the big players in the Kubernetes space are equally incentivized in that direction. So you'll see a lot of support in the community to make sure that there can be multiple providers for containers as well as everything else.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Do either of you have anything more to contribute? Have you played with Rocket?
Not really. I really appreciate Rocket existing, though. I think it's really useful to have multiple players in all the different layers of the stack.
Yep.
Having one software component only existing in one shape and form is scary and frightening.
Yeah, well, this goes back to Richard's comment of let's talk about containers, not Docker, and
absolutely.
Let's talk about orchestration, not Mesos or Kubernetes. How about you, Leah? When you've been researching, have you dug into Rocket yet?
I went through these tutorials, so I made a Rocket container.
Mm-hmm.
That was like surprisingly easy, actually. Like, you just you stick some files in the right place and you run their tool. The hardest part actually was realizing that I needed to run the tool on Linux, and I was running it on my Mac, so I had to start over again inside a VM. But the Rocket sounds pretty cool. It's definitely security is definitely something we think about. It's important. As one of many concerns with running Docker.
Right.
Is just the running the daemon as root and stuff.
Yep. And then AppC is pulling it all together, correct? Rocket in Docker? Okay, I'm catching up. Excellent. More questions? One more? Okay. Am I keeping you all from coffee? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you.